The wind across the Mongolian steppe cuts like a knife. The horizon stretches endlessly, broken only by scrub grass, the bones of old fires and the movement of distant horses. Out here life is raw, harsh, short. And one boy somewhere among the dust and hunger is learning a truth that will one day shape empires. His name is Temujin. He wasn't born to wealth or comfort. He wasn't born a prince or a priest. He was born into struggle. His tribe was small, always watching the horizon for raids, and his earliest memories were of hunger. Wild onions, frozen berries, the occasional rat roasted over a meager flame. That was survival. The steppe didn't forgive weakness, and it didn't wait for anyone to grow up. When Temujin was 9, everything changed. His father, a local leader of modest respect, was poisoned by a rival clan during what should have been a peaceful meeting. There were no guards, no revenge. Just a boy left holding a father's bow he was too small to draw. Tradition said the tribe should protect his family. Instead, they abandoned them. Overnight, they went from leadership to outcasts. A widow, her children, and nothing else. Imagine being 9 years old, your father's body barely cold, and watching your tribe ride away. Taking every horse, every scrap of food, every friend you thought you had. No one looked back. No one said goodbye. Temujin and his family were left to starve, but they didn't die. Day after day, Temujin hunted the smallest prey, rats, marmots, sometimes even stealing from other families. He learned to survive not because he was strong, but because he was stubborn. That stubbornness would become his weapon. He began to see the steppe for what it was, not a home, but a chessboard. Every tribe was a piece in motion, ruled not by loyalty or blood, but by advantage. He understood something that most men never did, that the old tribal system was broken. It rewarded birth, not merit. It celebrated family ties, not skill. And it was fragile, one betrayal away from collapse. For a boy who had lost everything, this was the lesson that would define his life. He decided silently that when he rose again, because in his heart he already knew he would, he'd build something different. Something that didn't crumble under betrayal. Temujin didn't grow up rich, but he grew up observant. Every enemy that attacked his family became a study, every betrayal a lesson. The world was teaching him its rules, and he was learning how to rewrite them. Years passed across the steppe, and the boy who once trembled in the cold learned to walk with the patience of the wind. Temujin grew taller, sharper, and harder. The loneliness that once broke him now built him. He learned to ride with precision, to track with silence, to endure without complaint. Every scar, every empty stomach, every night beneath frozen stars carved something deeper into his soul, a will that could not be broken. But the world he lived in was still merciless. The steppe was ruled by tribes, each clinging to power like wolves guarding scraps. Honor was a word twisted by necessity. A promise was only good until hunger returned. Temujin began to move among them again, not as a beggar but as a hunter, seeking alliances, not pity. He found strength not in bloodlines but in loyalty, the rarest currency in a land of betrayal. He married Berta, the woman history often forgets, was his first true ally. Their bond wasn't born of power but of mutual survival. Berta's strength matched his own, quiet, unyielding. For a time they carved a small peace together, but peace was fragile and enemies never slept. One night, a rival tribe struck, stealing Berta away. That moment lit a fire in Temujin that the world would never again extinguish. He gathered men, not many, but loyal. He didn't promise them gold or glory. He promised them fairness, something no Khan had ever given. He rewarded courage, not heritage. And when he rode to rescue his wife, those men followed him into a storm of blood. Berta was freed, and Temujin's legend began to whisper across the plains. A leader had emerged, not of tribe, but of destiny. Other chiefs watched. Some feared him, some mocked him. They called him the Wolf, a name both curse and warning. But the wolf didn't need permission to hunt. Temujin understood that leadership was not taken through inheritance. It was seized through vision. For every tribe that laughed at him, another joined him quietly, drawn to the strange young man who spoke of unity instead of conquest. It was an idea unheard of. A single people under one banner. To the old tribes, it sounded like madness. To Temujin, it sounded inevitable. The world was too wide for petty rivalries, and he knew the steppe could either devour itself or rise together under something greater. He began to build that vision piece by piece, men by men, tribe by tribe, promise by promise. Through every skirmish he refined his tactics: speed, precision, discipline, no wasted motion, no blind fury. The steppe had always favored chaos. He turned it into strategy. His warriors moved like smoke and struck like thunder. His name began to echo not as Temujin the orphan, but Temujin the unifier. But power attracts danger. His old enemies, those who once abandoned him and his family, began to see what he was becoming. They gathered, whispered, and plotted. The boy they left to starve had returned, and this time he was not alone. The steppe was changing and everyone could feel it. The wind carried a new name, one that would soon eclipse all others. Genghis. The steppes roared with the sound of hooves and wind. Tribes that once roamed freely now found themselves caught between loyalty and fear. Temujin's rise was no longer a rumor whispered around fires. It was a force of nature. He moved with the precision of a hunter and the purpose of a storm. The man who had once begged for scraps now demanded unity from chieftains who bowed to no one. And one by one they began to kneel. But unity came with blood. The old clans resisted, their pride older than memory. Battles erupted across the plains, fires painting the horizon red. Temujin led from the front, never from the safety of command. His presence on the battlefield was electric, his tactics terrifyingly efficient. He struck like lightning, vanishing before the dust settled. When the smoke cleared, the message was always the same. The steppe would be won, or it would burn trying. Each victory hardened his legend. Each rebellion tested his mercy. Temujin spared those who surrendered, but crushed those who betrayed him. His justice was swift and without favoritism. No man, not even his allies, stood above the law. It was a code built not on power, but on purpose. And it reshaped the Mongol tribes into something the world had never seen. An army bound not by blood, but by belief. Yet power breeds envy. Jamuka, Temujin's blood brother turned rival, gathered his own followers. Their friendship, once forged in the wild, turned to ash in the heat of ambition. Jamuka declared himself Khan and branded Temujin a usurper. The steppe for the first time split in two. Brothers made enemies, tribes forced to choose. The war that followed was not for land, but for the soul of the plains. The fighting was brutal. Skies turned black with smoke and arrows. For years, neither side could claim victory. But Temujin's discipline began to outlast Jamuka's pride. His warriors were not mere raiders. They were craftsmen of war. Every strike, every ambush, every feint served a purpose. When Jamuka's forces finally fractured, the balance tipped. The man who once called him brother fled into the wilderness. When Jamuka was eventually captured, Temujin faced a choice that would define him. The traders who brought Jamuka offered his head as tribute, but Temujin refused. He remembered the boy he once laughed with under the stars. He remembered the oath of brotherhood, even if the world had forgotten it. And in that moment, Temujin showed mercy, not weakness. He ordered Jamuka to be executed without pain. Even enemies, he said, deserved dignity in death. The tribes watched and understood. Temujin was not a man like the Khans before him. He was something new, both ruthless and righteous, both destroyer and builder. His justice was as cold as steel, yet it had meaning. The steppe that once devoured him now followed him willingly. He was no longer fighting for survival. He was shaping destiny. By the year's end, banners bearing his crest, a simple black symbol of unity, fluttered across the horizon. The fires of war still burned, but their light revealed something extraordinary. The Mongols were no longer a scattered people. They were a nation in the making, and at its heart stood a man who had risen from dust to dominion. The steppe had burned, but from its ashes, an empire was beginning to breathe. The wind carried whispers of a new name, Genghis Khan. It wasn't given by birth or bloodline. It was earned through fire, loyalty, and fear. In 1206, the steppe gathered under one banner. Chiefs and warriors from every tribe knelt in silence as Temujin rose before them. The man who had united a people that had never known unity. When he spoke, even the sky seemed to listen. "We are one," he said, "and the world will remember our name." From that moment, Temujin was gone. Genghis Khan was born. The coronation was more than ceremony. It was the forging of a new world order. The Mongols, once a collection of feuding clans, now stood as a single nation bound by law and vision. Genghis issued decrees. No theft, no betrayal, no abuse of women or the weak. Every man, no matter his birth, would be judged by his worth and loyalty. The steppe that had once run wild now pulsed with discipline. He called it the Yasa, the great law, his word unbreakable and eternal. But Genghis was not content with unity. The horizon called to him, vast and full of promise. His scouts returned with tales of cities overflowing with silk, silver, and arrogance. To the west lay kingdoms fat with gold. To the east, empires wrapped in walls that kissed the clouds. He saw not borders but challenges, not peace but opportunity. The steppe had been his cradle. The world would be his legacy. His first campaigns were swift, surgical, and merciless. The Tanguts fell first, their fortresses crushed beneath the thunder of Mongol cavalry. The Jin dynasty of northern China followed. Believing their walls would protect them, they didn't. Genghis studied his enemies, adapted their tactics, and turned them against them. Siege engineers, spies, even scholars, all found use under his command. To him, wisdom was a weapon sharper than any sword. Behind every victory rode an idea that fear could conquer faster than armies. When a city resisted, it burned. When it surrendered, it was spared and absorbed. The message was simple and devastating. Obedience was survival. By the time his banners reached the edges of Persia, even distant kings whispered his name with dread. Genghis had become a storm that rolled across continents, leaving silence in its wake. But the man inside the legend still carried shadows. At night he thought of Berta, his wife, the woman who had stood beside him through capture, war, and exile. Her faith had been his anchor. Her pain, his fire. He built palaces but still slept in tents. He ruled millions, yet remained haunted by the boy who once starved by a frozen river. Empire hadn't erased his hunger. It had only sharpened it. Genghis Khan was more than a conqueror. He was an architect. He built networks of trade and communication that stretched from the Pacific to the Black Sea. Riders relayed messages faster than any kingdom had dreamed possible. The Mongol Empire became a living organism, disciplined, responsive, unstoppable. It was a miracle born from chaos, guided by one man's unyielding will. Yet the more the empire grew, the heavier the weight on his shoulders became. Each conquest demanded more lives, more loyalty, more blood. His generals, once brothers in arms, began to question. Some sought their own glory. Others feared the endless wars. But Genghis had no illusions. He knew peace was not given, it was taken. And to secure his people's future, he would burn 1,000 cities if he had to. The world watched in awe and terror as the Mongol Empire stretched beyond imagination. From the deserts of Central Asia to the palaces of China, the earth trembled beneath his rule. Genghis Khan had done what no ruler before him dared to dream. He had united the steppe and brought nations to their knees. But in the stillness between battles, even he wondered, how long can a storm last before it destroys itself? The birth of an empire was complete, but the shadow of destiny still lingered. The next wars would not only test his strength, they would test his soul. The sky over Central Asia was dark with dust and smoke, the shadow of a storm called Genghis Khan. His empire had no borders now, only frontiers waiting to fall. From the edge of China to the gates of Persia, the earth trembled under hoofbeats that sounded like thunder. But this storm was not born of nature. It was born of one man's relentless will, a will that refused to stop, even when the world begged him to. His armies moved like rivers of iron. Archers rode faster than wind, loosing arrows before the enemy could blink. No wall was too high, no army too vast. City after city fell. Their gates splintered, their towers turned to ash. For every victory, stories grew, of Mongol riders who appeared out of fog, struck without warning, and vanished like ghosts. The name Genghis Khan became a curse whispered in 100 tongues, and a prayer on the lips of those who survived. In Persia, resistance burned bright and then was extinguished. Cities that defied him were erased from maps. The Shah fled, chased by a vengeance no mortal could outrun. Genghis watched the empire of Khwarezm crumble, its riches flowing into his hands like rivers of gold and blood. But with each conquest, his face grew harder. The victories brought no peace, only the echo of loss. He had everything, yet felt nothing. For Genghis, the world was no longer about power. It was about proving something, to the gods, to history, to himself. The boy who once watched his father die by poison still whispered inside him, reminding him that mercy was weakness. So he hardened his heart, even as it began to crack. The men around him worshipped him as divine. But the truth was cruel. The greatest conqueror the world had ever known was also its loneliest soul. When word reached him that his son Yochi had defied his command, the world saw another storm rise, not of steel, but of silence. Genghis never forgave him. Even the bonds of blood could not survive the weight of empire. To rule all others, he had to rule his own heart, and that meant cutting out every trace of doubt. The empire demanded it. The gods, if they were watching, remained silent. And then the East called again. China, vast, ancient, proud. Genghis returned not as a barbarian, but as destiny itself. The Jin dynasty's walls could not save them. The Mongol war machine surrounded their cities, cutting off every breath, every hope. When Kaifeng fell, it was not just another victory. It was a message carved into stone. The old world had ended. The age of Genghis had begun, but storms cannot last forever. The man who had conquered half the world began to feel time tug at his armor. His body ached, his breath grew heavy, and whispers of rebellion stirred in far-off lands. He had built something too vast, too fierce to control. Even his sons began to dream of their own empires. In the quiet of night, as campfires flickered against the steppe wind, Genghis would look to the stars, the same stars that once guided a hungry boy, and wonder what awaited him beyond conquest. When death finally came, it came as softly as dawn. No battle, no assassin, just the slow fading of a flame that had burned too bright for too long. His burial place was never found. Legends say his riders killed every soul who saw it, then let their horses trample the earth flat, hiding him forever beneath the soil he had conquered. The earth itself became his tomb, and yet his shadow never vanished. The empire he forged became the largest the world had ever seen, a bridge between east and west, where ideas, trade, and terror flowed side by side. Genghis Khan had devoured the world, and in doing so had fed the future. His name would echo across centuries, not as a monster, but as a maker of history itself. History remembers many kings, but only one storm. And that storm's name was Genghis Khan.